The tabletop takeaway.
Game mechanics on display.
Three designers share the stage.
Pick a genre and we'll play.
The tabletop takeaway.
All right, well, welcome to our podcast. This is the very first episode. I'm Ananda.
I'm Charlie.
And I'm Trevor.
And all of us are board game designers. And so we decided to start this podcast to talk about game design, and specifically to talk about game design by looking at some published games and breaking them down, looking at what they do well, how they work, why some of the decisions may have been made, and ultimately what we can take away from it all.
So this podcast is going to go in a kind of a series of chapters. This first chapter we're going to cover is tile placement. For our tile placement section, we're going to be doing 3 different games. We have, first off here is Kingdomino, followed by Carcassonne, and then Galaxy Trucker.
Yeah, I'm excited to chat with you guys because I've also had this idea a long time ago. I don't know if I told you this, but when you asked me to join in a podcast, I was like, oh, that's such a good idea to break down one game at a time and figure out what we can take away from it as designers.
Absolutely.
Is that like what the idea that you had a long time ago?
Kind of, yeah.
Oh, awesome.
So,
full circle.
Yeah, full circle.
Very fortunate
Yep.
then. Yeah. All right. Well, I guess the first one that we have here is Kingdomino. Trevor, do you want to explain what Kingdomino is all about?
Sure. So if you're not familiar, Kingdomino is a pretty simple tile-laying game that revolves around building a kingdom around a castle. It's set up in kind of a 5x5 grid, and you're just trying to get the most points as efficiently as possible. Some of the tiles have crowns on them. They're all different terrains, and when you have enough crowns, you multiply it by the terrain of that type, and you get your score in the end. Pretty straightforward. Has some interesting kind of choice mechanics around when you get to play by tile selection. And yeah, that's kind of a really brief rundown of how Kingdomino goes. Yeah,
the core of it seems to be based on this drafting mechanic. These tiles have numbers, which seem to be to correspond to the strength of the tile, or how many points it's going to be worth, how useful it's going to be. And then so you draft them in turn order, but then based on the number of the tile you took, the higher the tile is, the later you're going to draft for the next round. So it's sort of balancing what you need for your kingdom now against how much you want an early position in the turn order to draft the next tile.
Yeah, and I love how there's a lot of different strategy you can do, even with this just simple layout. And like, I found myself making this gigantic desert, but I didn't have any crowns for my desert. So it was set up to be 0 points for me unless I could find at least 1 crown. And so I found myself going for turn order rather than like a really points-heavy tile.
Well, and when you don't know what the next row of tiles is going to be, you're kind of left in a state of suspense with, okay, should I go first to make sure I can stay on the top of that line? Or do I need to start getting crowns with the lower tiles or the more valuable tiles? Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's an interesting choice. And it's pretty simple. I mean, I played this game with my nephew, and he was about 8 years old, and he picked it up really quick. We played through 3 or 4 games back to back. Like, he was hooked almost immediately.
Yeah, it is definitely a very simple game to explain and to learn, which is a good thing. That's sort of the weight category that it fits into.
Yeah, I'm curious. So what do you guys think from a game design perspective? What's this game doing well, or not as well, or yeah?
I think for me, it's a really good introduction to tile laying games, and that it has a very simple mechanic like we've been talking about, but clearly, like, when they were making it, there had to be a trade-off, right? a trade-off between a weaker tile and a stronger tile, since you're not rolling dice, since you don't have any other randomization mechanics. It's not like a bag builder where you just dig in and hope for the best. Like, it actually has strategy behind it. So I think that's a really cool approach for it. And then also, you may get crowns, but are the crowns congruent with the rest of your kingdom? Does that terrain actually match anything else you have? So, like, being able to plan that out and kind of have a long-term strategy, even though it's randomized, it's still very possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does characterize. So I guess this is one thing I noticed. The different terrain types are characterized to some extent, but sometimes it can be a little bit hard to see the distinctions between them. So, for example, there's this mine terrain type, which appears quite uncommonly. In fact, it's mostly on the higher numbers, but it tends to have a lot of crowns. So generally, you have a small area with mines, and then with a lot of crowns in that area, contrasted with something like the plains of wheat, where there are fewer crowns.
Oh, that's wheat.
But
I thought it was desert.
Yeah.
Yes, I actually did too for a second.
It does look like desert, but there are windmills.
Yep.
That makes more sense.
Yeah. But like crowns don't appear very much in the wheat fields, but there's a lot of wheat fields.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So you can make it very big. And of course, with any multiplication-based scoring system, the natural heuristic is try to balance the two things that are being multiplied. Because like the closer you get to an equal number, the more efficiently that's going to be converted into points. 1 times 6 is a lot less than 3 times 4, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, I was thinking about that too with the terrain types. And one principle I think that's good when you're designing a game is avoid flatness whenever you can. So each terrain has this different valuation of how it's going to work. And it also helps with making things have a different risk-reward payout.
Yeah.
So, like, if you go for the caves, you get some instant points, but it's risky because you might not even be able to draft another cave for the mines points. Yeah.
And there's only 6 caves in the entire game.
Yeah.
Where there's 21 blank wheat fields without crowns. So just for juxtaposition there, like that's insane. That's a big difference.
Yeah.
But I do feel that on your first time through the game, unless you're looking at the distribution, it's not going to be clear to you what the difference between the terrains are.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. The caves are kind of the exception because it's kind of obvious, like that, okay, caves, they don't appear very much, but they're high points because you see, oh, wow, 3 crowns. That's a very large number.
Well, and you think mines, you think wealth because, gold or whatever it is. Like, oh, yeah, those have got to be the good ones.
Right. And then there are differences between the other terrain types, but those don't really come through.
Right.
Like, if you're a new player, they're all going to look the same. Right. Unless, again, you're looking at the back of the rule book where there's a breakdown of the distribution.
So this is making me think of a general design challenge with card games, because the first time you play a card game, you might not know any of the cards in the deck. And so the more you put onto those cards that isn't immediately obvious, the harder it is going to be to get someone in on their first play.
Yeah.
But the replayability of card games and like tile games where you don't know what the tiles are, yeah,
that's actually
high.
Reminiscent also, not to bring up Catan, but Catan has the dots of how probable it is on a scale of, 36 options. So like it's trying to help that player understand, no matter what playthrough it is for them, hey, this one's going to be more common.
Yeah.
You may not be very good at understanding probabilities of 2d6, and that snake eyes is very rare. But it's going to try and help you with that. And so any way that a game can do that for you, I think is really nice. And so having that on the back of the booklet is really cool, but it's not actually integrated into the game necessarily. That's more like you have to assume or guess, and that's a little bit tougher.
Yeah.
And now games like Wingspan, I have the probability on the bottom of the card. Like how
wow.
many of this card are there? So when you're trying for one of these random strategies, you can actually see like, okay, well, this is only in 1/5 of the deck, so
Right.
Yeah, that's really good. I mean, like one thing. This is Catan again.
Sure.
But the deck of development cards. I mean, if you look at the distribution, I think it's like 52 or 62% knights.
Oh, interesting.
And then like a really, really small. There are only 2 of each of the special actions. And there's like I think a 20% chance of getting a victory point card. And if you don't know any of that,
Right.
and you're just buying cards, you may have a very skewed idea of what you can get because people remember like playing the Monopoly card, but you have actually a very low chance of drawing that card.
Well, that's why I never did development cards, because I always got knights, and I really didn't want to fight for the largest army. So just like, well, that's really expensive. I don't really care about that.
Yeah, I think if the distribution of cards or tiles or something matters, I think it's important to give players some idea of what they can expect. And it doesn't always matter. I think it matters mostly when, I suppose when you're making decisions that are going to depend on drawing more cards or tiles of a certain type.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and go ahead.
Oh, yeah. Well, just sort of tangentially to that idea, it was funny because I have realized I've been playing Kingdomino with a house rule, unintentional. But because I was like, okay, when you're drafting to figure out what turn order you want, you should be able to see what the next row is, right? So you know if you want to
It makes
try
a
for
lot
the
of
next.
sense, yeah.
But the actual rules are, it's hidden what's going to be next. And
Yep.
it was okay this way, I think, too.
So you having played both ways, did you notice any did it feel different?
It felt this play felt much more like I had to go for that turn order top because I
need to guarantee that.
I really wanted
crown.
to. Yeah, I needed to get a crown on my wheats. And so I think if I had seen the other row, I would have laid back a little bit more on some of those. So whether or not that's good for new players or not, I don't know.
Well, I suppose if the central tension of the game is between drafting something you need now and setting yourself up to draft something next turn, anything which makes you more likely to... I guess taking away the certainty means that, yeah, like you said, you're more likely to risk it for next turn, which adds a little bit of risk reward, right? Like take the sure thing or gamble on maybe
push your luck, in a weird way,
which people like. I mean, that's a good thing.
Oh, yeah.
So maybe the actual rule is better than your house rule.
Maybe, yeah.
Well, and I'm going to add on to this that for really short games, having those kind of luck mechanics isn't the bad thing. Like if you're comparing it to Catan, which predominantly is luck based, if you get your resources or not, but it's it could be an hour and a half game. And this is a 15-minute game.
Yeah,
and I think that comparison is really important to remember too, where you can have more of those like luck elements in a shorter game.
Oh yeah. Yeah, the shorter your game is, the more crazy you can go. Like
absolutely,
One Night Ultimate Werewolf.
Yeah,
it's a wild game that does things you could not get away with in a game that takes an hour or 2 hours, because nobody cares if everything is ridiculous and if you're in a position where you're basically guaranteed to lose, because if the game's 10 minutes, it doesn't matter.
Right. Mm-hmm. I've definitely had a few One Night Ultimate Werewolves where that was the case.
Yeah, and it's fine.
I looked at your card. You're the werewolf. Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. So, should we move into our phase of game designer takeaways from this?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, what we were thinking is each of us will have something that's inspiring us, maybe to use in one of our future designs, or has inspired us in the past. So anyone who wants to throw one out there.
Sure. So I've been designing some point-based games, and getting a good multiplication in there is really tough. And like this handles that concept really well because you don't have to know multiplication to even do it. You can understand visibly how your points add up. And it's very simple, but I've seen several games where they try to use multiplication in the mechanics and it just gets so clunky. And so just reminding ourselves to like be very intentional and careful about multiplication in games.
Yeah.
That's a big takeaway for me.
Yeah. Talking with Ben of Floodgate, he said multipliers is like very appealing to game designers, but maybe not so much players. And I had a design recently where I thought, oh, this won't be too much to do at the end. It'll be okay. But I should have just known from the physical look of the spreadsheet I had created for the points. And it took like 5 to 10 minutes to just multiply and do all the math. And I'm like, no, that's not going to work.
Whoops. Yep, I feel that.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the drafting mechanic, I think a bit of what we were talking about, it's a really nice mechanic, and definitely the tension between getting what you want now and setting yourself up to get something next turn. I think that feels quite good. So, if I find myself in need of a drafting mechanic, I may look back to that.
Yeah.
Well, and it being based on those numbers too, where, the teens might go away at some point. And if you're keeping track of that and you're like, okay, well, I know there's going to be fewer of the plains and, the fewer of the wheat fields because those have all started to go away. Now I know I want to start going first more often so I can get those higher point cards.
Right, yeah.
It's a fascinating thing.
Yeah, and the way it orders it using the numbers on the back of the tiles is... I mean, it just works very well.
Yeah.
It's very clean.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's sort of my takeaway, too, is just giving everything that you could draft an inherent value.
Yeah.
Because, like, a lot of times you try to, we'll just let the players value what they are. But I think, actually, I might try to use this in some games because it's just, yeah.
Yeah, just
it's
give everything
nice.
a number.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Cool. Any closing thoughts on Kingdomino?
No. Well, I do find it a little weird that you have the center tile, and then you have a little cardboard castle that goes on the center tile, and then you have a little wooden meeple that goes in the castle, and those seem unnecessary to me.
To be fair, you have two gold or meeple kings, one of which you use for the drafting mechanic, but the other just hangs out in the castle all day.
Yeah.
And we're not really sure what that king's doing. But, I guess in worlds with two kings, one has to be doing something and the other watches the land. I'm not sure.
I guess. I mean, there's definitely something to just having fun components that don't cost them very much to
Absolutely.
make. Like, I think it's pretty smart that they have a cardboard thing that you can assemble is so easy to print.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Like, even cheaper than a single tile, I think, almost.
Yeah, I guess if you have some extra space in your punch board, why not?
Yeah. And the fact that you assemble a thing, there's a psychological reason behind that, too. Like, IKEA furniture. I built this thing, now I'm invested in it.
This is my thing now.
Right.
I've created this.
Yeah. Cool.
Absolutely.
Well, awesome. There we go, guys. Episode 1.
Thank you for listening. We did it. We made it to the end. Thank you for listening.
Tune in next time for episode 2.
Carcassonne. Hey, thanks for listening to The Tabletop Takeaway. This podcast is made possible by listeners like you. So please tell your friends and visit our website at thetabletoptakeaway.com, where you can suggest games and mechanics for us to cover next on the show.